They ignored the car washer until a general stood at attention and said, "Mission accomplished." The sun over Ciudad Domingos showed no mercy. Beads of sweat ran down Arturo Navarro's forehead as he scrubbed the silver hood of an armored SUV. The owner didn't even glance his way. He walked right past, talking on his cell phone as if Arturo were part of the asphalt. Sometimes Arturo wondered if he'd really become invisible. Customers talked loudly, laughed, shouted, complained, never to him but around him. They demanded more wax, no streaks on the windshield, "Hurry up, I'm in a rush," as if ordering a robot. Arturo responded with a curt nod or a "yes, sir," which no one heard. It had always been that way. 4 years, 6 days a week, 7 cars a day. On the car wash wall, a faded poster promised, "Pay attention to the details. They tell the whole story about you." Arturo knew that better than anyone. That's why he never let a drop of water linger on a mirror. That Saturday, everything seemed the same until it wasn't. At 11:42 a.m., as Arturo was drying the side mirror of a black Corolla, he felt it, a different kind of silence, as though the air had grown heavier. He lifted his eyes. A man stood a few yards away, watching him. Simple clothes, khaki pants, and a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Impeccable. But what caught Arturo's attention was the posture, straight, firm, almost military. Arturo stared for a second, then went back to work, assuming it was just another picky customer. The man approached slowly. He stopped less than 6 feet away, watching every one of Arturo's movements with solemn attention. Then, in a gesture that seemed to freeze the entire lot, he raised his right hand in a salute. Long, slow, formal. The world stopped. The hiss of the hose ceased. An attendant dropped a bucket. A couple waiting on a bench looked on, bewildered. "Is this some kind of prank?" whispered a teenage girl, pulling out her phone to record. The man held his hand steady at his temple for 5 seconds, then lowered it with elegant precision. Arturo halted his scrubbing. His eyes trembled. "Mr. Arturo Navarro," the man said in a firm voice, "it is an honor to finally meet you in person." The silence turned awkward. A mall security guard, seeing the scene, crossed the street. "Is there a problem here?" he barked, glaring at Arturo as if he'd caused the disturbance. The man calmly turned and produced a document folded into quarters, embossed with a crest. "General Ramiro Alcantara, Brazilian Army." The guard took a step back, eyes wide. He looked at Arturo as if seeing a ghost. "What?" Ramiro then fixed Arturo with absolute respect. "Sir, your past was smeared by lies, but the truth has come out. Today, I come not as a soldier, but as a citizen, to ask for forgiveness." Arturo took a step back. His hand still gripped the dripping rag. The ground seemed to vanish beneath his feet. "You must have me confused," he managed. "I'm not," replied the general, his voice low but cutting. "I was assigned a mission of historical redress. Your story, Lieutenant Colonel Navarro, is greater than you realize." Around them, people whispered. Some laughed, thinking it a staged act. Others filmed on their phones. Mrs. Claudia, sitting in the leather seat of her imported car, rolled down her window. "That car washer, a colonel, must be a joke. This man's worked here for years. I know him." Ramiro turned slowly to face her, saying not a word. His gaze chilled the lot, and Arturo, frozen in the middle of it all, the rag still dripping in his hands, felt everything spin. A general, a salute, a name he hadn't heard in decades, and all the eyes that had ignored him, now fixed on him. It was as if, for the first time in years, he'd come back into existence. For a moment, Arturo thought he was having a breakdown. The man in front of him was saying things he'd spent 2 decades trying to forget. "Lieutenant Colonel, border operation, hostages, betrayal. Words that hit like silent bombs in his head. The image the general held in his hands, a yellowed photograph of a soldier holding a child, was impossible to ignore. It was him. It was the past knocking at his door in uniform and emblem. The revelation landed like a blow. Arturo had been wronged. The evidence that destroyed him had been forged. The real traitor confessed before dying, all documented, signed, sealed. For 25 years he'd been condemned for a crime he never committed. He lost everything: the uniform, the medals, his name, his marriage, his future, and worst of all, he lost his very existence. He became invisible. And now, there in the middle of a car wash, with grease on the ground and soap on his hands, a general was saying the army wanted to apologize. But it wasn't just that. They wanted to clear his name, restore his honors, publicly declare his innocence, award him right there in that same lot where he'd been treated like nobody, a recognition as a national hero. Arturo felt dizzy. Meanwhile, around him, the reaction was predictable. Customers sneered, laughed nervously. Employees whispered. Some filmed with their phones. Mrs. Claudia, the arrogant client who'd treated him like a faceless employee for years, rolled down her window and spat venom. "A hero? This guy can't even wash a car right." Mr. Mario, the car wash owner, appeared furious, thinking Arturo was causing trouble. He tried to smooth things over, but only made it worse by suggesting the general was there over some mix-up. Humiliation piled on disbelief. That's when the general acted. Calmly, he walked to his car, returned with an official folder, and announced that this would be the site of the redress, and that it would be public. In growing silence, he read the document. The institution acknowledged its error, declared Arturo innocent, asked for forgiveness, reinstated his honor, and had insisted on doing so before the very people who'd ignored him for years. There was no doubt now. The car washer was, in fact, a hero buried by injustice. And that stifling Saturday, beneath the distant hum of engines and foam, a forgotten man finally had his truth revealed. Not with fireworks, not with applause, but with the stunned silence of those who'd never learned to look past a dirty uniform. The truth had been exposed. Officially, irrefutably, but in the real world, the weight of truth doesn't always land immediately. What followed the reading of the document was mortifying. Some laughed, trying to cling to their sense of superiority. Others fell silent, not knowing where to look. But Mrs. Claudia, the most arrogant client in the lot, couldn't contain herself. She climbed out of her car like someone ready to clean up a mess, pointed at Arturo and shouted for all to hear, "This is ridiculous. This man's worked here for years. He's nothing. He'll never be anything. He's a car washer, not a hero. This stunt is disrespectful." Then she did what she did almost every week. She flung her car keys at Arturo like tossing scraps to a dog, demanded her car be spotless in 15 minutes or she'd be talking to the manager. But this time, something was different. Arturo didn't look down. There was no servility. There was something intact in him, as though beneath years of grime and soap, something ancient and powerful was being reborn. Dignity. Mr. Mario, the car wash owner, rushed to the general, agitated, trying to explain, saying he knew nothing, that Arturo had always been odd, too quiet, that he was just a washer. But it was too late for apologies. The general spoke again, not to Arturo, not to the soldiers, but to everyone present. He said the army had failed, justice had failed, but the greatest failure was by ordinary people, those who decide who deserves respect based on clothes, rank, or bank balance. He said the arrogance of one client and the indifference of an employer spoke more about this country than any official document ever could. Then, from the trunk, He pulled a dark, waxed wooden box with a golden crest. There, before everyone, he opened it and revealed a gleaming medal, the Peacekeeper's Medal, the highest military decoration for bravery and honor. He pinned it to Arturo's chest, and once again he saluted. But this time, he wasn't alone. Two car wash employees who'd been watching in silence mimicked the gesture. One of them wept quietly. A customer shut off their phone and bowed their head. The whole lot fell silent. Before them stood no mere car washer. He stood as a man who'd endured abandonment, humiliation, lies, and yet remained standing. For years, they'd washed their cars without seeing the human who cleaned them. Now, they saw everything. The truth had come to light, honor restored, but nobody imagined what would come next. The general hadn't yet finished his mission. Still standing in the silent lot, he produced a second envelope, this one sealed with the presidential crest. And there, in front of everyone, he read aloud with steady conviction, the state officially acknowledged the injustice done to Arturo Navarro. More than words, there would be concrete reparations. First, retroactive payment of 25 years' worth of salary, benefits and pensions, fully adjusted, nearly 2 million rees. Second, a $500,000 real compensation for moral damages. Third, a retroactive promotion to colonel, with the right to immediate reinstatement in the armed forces or retirement at full pay. It was a turnaround that had seemed impossible just minutes before. A car washer who'd been ignored, now a millionaire, decorated and recognized as a national hero. But as everyone in the lot glanced at one another in shock, perhaps expecting a smile, a sigh of relief, a celebration, Arturo remained silent. He didn't cheer, he didn't smile, he didn't hug anybody. His eyes were distant, as if he were somewhere else, in another time, in another body. Because he knew what nobody there knew. Money doesn't erase humiliation. It doesn't undo the years his daughter grew up never seeing her father as he truly was. It doesn't rebuild a marriage destroyed by lies. It can't bring back the friends who vanished, and it doesn't heal the shame of being branded a traitor. Justice had arrived too late for so much. And now, facing the chance to don his uniform again, to serve once more, Arturo hesitated. Not out of pride, but because he was exhausted, because that life had been ripped from him with cruelty, because he'd learned to survive away from the spotlight, because part of him still doubted it was real. The general looked at him with respect and said, "You don't have to decide now, but there will be an official ceremony in Brasilia with the president. National broadcast. You have the right to be seen and to be heard." Arturo didn't answer. He just looked at his hands stained with grease, soap, sun, hands that once carried bodies, saved lives, and later were reduced to wiping windows without a name. He knew he was no longer fighting just for himself, but to accept meant reopening old wounds and exposing himself all over again. That night, after the car wash closed and the general departed, Arturo stayed alone for a few minutes. Sitting on a bench in the lot, he stared at the uniform folded inside the box. He traced the fabric with his fingertips, as if touching a wound. The uniform he never thought he'd wear again was his now. But he knew the uniform was light. What really weighed on him was the choice. In the days after the revelation, Arturo withdrew. He didn't show up at the car wash. He didn't answer anyone's calls. Not even the general knew where he was. But Arturo hadn't run away. He was home, surrounded by memories he'd buried more than 20 years ago. The Peacekeeper's Medal lay on his living room table. Next to it, the uniform that had once been his second skin, and an envelope stuffed with old letters he'd never replied to, from comrades who'd vanished when he needed them most. He reread them like a soldier revisiting a battlefield. But then something new began to happen. First, a voice message, then an email, Soon dozens, then hundreds. They were soldiers, former officers, families of veterans, ordinary people, people who had lived their own silent injustices, who'd been discarded, who'd disappeared into anonymity like he had. And now, in Arturo, saw a reflection and hope. Some said, "You are what remains of our dignity." Others begged, "Don't disappear again. Speak for us." It was no longer about him. It was about all those who had never been heard. That's when Arturo realized his story, as harsh as it was, now had a purpose, and his pain could indeed become a bridge to something greater. The ceremony in Brasilia ceased to be a belated tribute. It became a collective cry. The next morning, Arturo put on his uniform for the first time in 25 years. Alone, in front of the mirror, he saw what he thought he'd lost. Not just a soldier, but a whole man. And at that moment, he decided he would go to Brasilia, not for status, not for money, but because the truth, once it finally finds a voice, can never be silenced again. Brasilia, 1 week later, the Grand Hall of the Palacio da Alvorada, dignitaries in formation, live broadcast. The nation was watching, but the center of this ceremony wasn't just any official. It was a man who'd spent 2 decades washing cars in silence, a man who wore injustice on his chest and carried the weight of thousands of forgotten Brazilians on his shoulders. Arturo Navarro crossed the hall in the uniform he hadn't worn in 25 years. His polished shoes caught the light. The jacket fit him as if it had never left his body. When he stepped onto the stage, there was no orchestra, no lengthy speeches. The president stood, walked over to him, looked him in the eye, and in a clear voice said, "On behalf of the Brazilian state, we ask your forgiveness." The apology was simple, direct, official. And then, the moment nobody expected, Arturo was invited to speak. He hesitated for a second, took a deep breath, and began. His voice was deep, seasoned by time, but each word struck like a bullet of truth. He spoke of honor, of being called a traitor when he was faithful, of washing cars and being ignored by everyone except his own conscience. He spoke of the day a child looked into his eyes and said, "You saved me," and how nobody else believed it for 25 years. He said he wasn't returning to the army out of vanity. He was returning for justice, and for those who never had the chance to tell their side of the story. But the most powerful moment came at the end. He held up the medal and said, "This decoration isn't mine alone. It belongs to all the invisible workers. Those who clean bathrooms, drive buses, collect trash, serve behind counters, honest people who carry this country on their backs and are never seen. To them, I dedicate this honor. Because a man's worth isn't in the clothes he wears, but in the character he keeps, even when nobody's watching." Total silence. A thick, moving quiet. Tears wiped discreetly. Applause that started timidly, then rose to a standing ovation. In the days that followed, the speech spread like wildfire. It went viral on social media. Clips shared under hashtags like Chen Real Brazil, Chen's Silent Hero, Chen Not About Uniform About Dignity. And Arturo, who'd been erased from history for years, now became a national symbol, not of war, nor of power, but of resilience. Arturo returned to Ciudad Domingos a changed man, but the neighborhood was the same. The streets, the glances, the smells. Everything was just as it had always been, except for one thing. Now everyone saw him. Some crossed the street to avoid the awkwardness. Others, like Mrs. Claudia, tried to make amends. She showed up at the car wash days later, holding a bouquet of flowers and a rehearsed apology. Arturo listened politely, but said little. He simply nodded and offered a look free of anger. Only distance. Mr. Mario, the former owner, couldn't bear the shame. He sold the car wash and disappeared from town. The new owner got straight to the point. He changed the name. Now the sign read in big letters, Lieutenant Colonel Arturo Navarro Car Wash, where respect is the first service. But Arturo wasn't washing cars anymore. With part of the settlement, he founded a support center for forgotten veterans, a place with no flashy facade, but with doors always open. There, men and women marked by abandonment found legal help, psychological support, and, most importantly, a listening ear. He served in person, not as a hero, but as someone who knew what it meant to vanish while still alive. One day, a young soldier arrived, thin, scarred in body and spirit, discharged without explanation, no medical care, no support, just another number tossed aside by the system. Arturo didn't ask what happened, he just listened, and when the young man finished speaking, voice trembling, eyes red, Arturo put his hand on the soldier's shoulder and said, "You are not alone, and you will never be invisible again." That's how Arturo Navarro's story ended, or perhaps truly began. Because justice, once it arrives, doesn't erase the past, but it can change the future. And a person's worth, this lesson he taught the whole country, has never been in a bank account, a rank, or a job title. It's in standing tall, even when the whole world turns its back. Do you know what hurts most about this story? That it's real for so many people. If you've ever been treated as invisible, or you know someone who carries the world on their shoulders and is never recognized, comment one word: respect. That's it. To show there are still people awake, people who see what really matters.